Josh, and I am tuning in from Doha, Qatar. And I'm with my group mates here, and we're going to be talking about memory and specifically with dance.
Hey guys, I'm Stephanie. I am in Newport News, Virginia.
Hi, I'm Lindsay. I am coming from Houston, Texas.
And I'm Cassandra. Can't even say my name right. And I'm coming from New Orleans.
Great.
Okay. So can you guys still see me? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. So we all decided that we were really interested in both concussions and how it affects memory. And so if you haven't already, we suggest that you check out the YouTube video that we provided. It has both sequences that we're going to talk about within the one video, so it's just one video that you have to watch. But we initially were trying to figure out what population to work with, and typically when you think of concussions, you run straight to football or hockey or soccer, and so we decided to go in a completely different direction. And we decided to work with dancers because I'm actually a dancer, and so I had access to multiple dancers that we could sort of put into a simulated experience of experiencing that type of disorientation and dizziness that you experience with concussion. And so we went with a dancer population, which typically aren't. I mean, they don't necessarily consider that a sport, but it depends on your viewpoint of that. And so, from my perspective, and I think from the rest of the group's perspective, we all think that dancing can be pretty competitive. And I know several dancers who have experienced concussion, so it does major damage because when you are dancing, you have to rely heavily on your memory to remember all the dance sequences, how it fits with the music. There's so many connections that need to be made for dancers. So we did that, and we put them sort of through two experiments. First was we wanted to look at short-term memory / the working memory. So I taught them a few 8 counts of a routine that they had never seen. And what happened was I had them do it several times over and over again. And then had them spin around 10 times and then repeat it once again. And then the second time around, we did long-term memory, so a dance piece that they have already known for several weeks now. And did the same thing where they did it, spun, and then did it again to see how the disorientation and dizziness affected their dance routines. So do you guys have any input you guys saw and how it connects to some of the topics we talked about?
Yeah. So.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Josh.
No, it's all you. Sorry to cut you off.
No, that's okay. And I don't know how to make myself bigger in here, so I'm just gonna keep talking as a small screen. I was just, in kind of the initial reaction, for me, I'm not a dancer. I quit dance when I was 3 because I was like, man, this is hard, and became a softball player. But I think in relationship to memory and the concussion piece, when I was watching you kind of teach the dance, how quickly everyone picked up on it, I thought was just incredible. I was like, oh my God, I'm confused. And even when you weren't 100% sure, like everyone in the background was just and kind of doing their cues and their movements. And so I think the impact of the concussion, of a concussion for a dancer, there's a lot more of that working memory and that short-term memory than in a lot of other sports. If I'm playing softball, I remember how to throw, 6 pitches and off I go. So I think it also might have a bigger impact on performance because you're kind of having to remember those, those really, nuances and kind of that continual memory throughout the process. So I wasn't really sure, but I was just impressed by the whole thing. And then they spun around and did it anyway, and I was like, oh my gosh. So the bar I thought was set pretty high to begin with. So
Definitely.
Yeah, for sure. So, Stephanie, you're talking a little bit about short-term versus long-term memory, and a couple studies I found actually looked at concussive symptoms and specifically memory. And what this study showed by White et al. In 2012 was that verbal list learning post-concussion, these athletes saw great issues with remembering verbal instructions, greatest in 3 to 4 days post-concussion. So that's short-term. But also I found another study here who said, by Ozen et al. In 2013, where they looked at a bunch of football players, and they found that working memory can be affected up to 6 months post-concussion. So when we were talking about kind of your dance routine here, you even said some of these people had learned it before you filmed them.
Mm-hmm.
And once they became dizzy and disoriented, they struggled to remember it at times. And even though they were able to perform it, because, they're obviously great dancers, they struggled to do so. So we see that these kind of symptoms of concussion can not only be persistent in athletes a couple days after the trauma, but also even 6 months down the line. So I was just kind of interested by that, of how it affects memory. And if you're an athlete, say, concussion with football players, you say, you got to remember all these plays. It can affect them 6 months down the line, more than half the season down the line if they get in the first game. So, but specifically with dance, like I said, verbal list learning was really affected a couple days after. And that would obviously, like you said, really be detrimental to the dancer learning a routine.
Right.
I was gonna say that with the long-term memory, it can be both implicit and explicit. So, like, they can have a hard time remembering the moves, or they could have problems with their motor control or their balance or their spin control. The accuracy of the different body parts that they use to dance. So I thought that was unique as well.
Yeah.
Right.
Kind of
and I know some of the dancers talked about concentration, that, they had to, one dancer said they concentrated more, so they thought they did it better. And then someone's like, I had to concentrate too much, so I wasn't kind of feeling the music. And I think, that's also true as well. Like, what we have to put our bodies through to kind of generate that focus to perform a task that sometimes is automatic.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, to kind of go off that a little bit, what Cassandra was saying here was that study I found about the working memory being affected for 6 months post-concussion also found that individuals who experience remote concussions may be able to effortlessly complete a single task that only requires a little bit of attentional resource, but they're really going to struggle and show difficulties when attentional control is required. So not only attentional control, like learning the routine and verbally processing it, but also controlling their bodies, like Cassandra mentioned.
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing that was so concerning was not with the short term, but more long term. Like, all of them, or for the most part, most of them were struggling to remember parts. Some of them completely stopped, like they completely forgot what was next. They had to focus more on the moves that should be automatic. So I think that was definitely concerning. And it was just, I honestly didn't expect as much damage, I think, just from the disorientation than what we actually saw.
Yeah, that's why.
Yeah, because I think, the hypothesis was that short-term memory, they weren't going to be able to do any of it. But it really was more the long-term memory when you think about concussion protocol and, what we test to see if an athlete is ready. we're not testing them on, do you remember, your essay that you wrote 6 months ago? We're putting them through more of the short-term memory, and, research is really reminding us that a lot more is impacted, but, we don't necessarily always. I was really surprising, too.
And
right.
something
for spinning around 10 times, like that was it.
Sorry. When I think about dance specifically, I don't know too much about it, but it seems like once you get a routine down, it's almost like you're moving on to the next. Like you got to learn another one when the time comes for the next show or something like that. And to bring up another study here, they found that people who experienced multiple concussions actually showed white matter damage years after those concussions took place. And what this led them to believe that these white matter abnormalities were linked to cognitive deficits, one being memory. And the study even showed reduced visual learning and recall. And these abnormalities were linked to neuropsychiatric symptoms, as I mentioned, like memory. But even someone who experiences multiple concussions, let's say a dancer, years down the line will continually be affected by having to learn a new routine. I mean, how often?
Mm-hmm.
Like each week?
I mean, typically it depends. Like for the group that I work with, I choreograph and then teach them. So we typically learn a routine for a couple weeks, and then we add an additional routine on top of learning, like finishing the initial routine.
Yeah.
So they'll be learning 2 routines at the same time. So it would be interesting to see how 2 could potentially be affected by a concussion.
That's just wild because, I mean, one study I found said visual recall is going to be affected, and you're obviously visually demonstrating how to do this dance, and on top of that, you're verbally instructing, which, I mean, verbal listening was really negatively affected by post-concussive symptoms. So being a dancer and having concussive symptoms just seems to be really detrimental to performance as a dancer, for sure.
Right. I think the interesting thing was that when I actually had to redo everything because I did a video on Monday, and I tried to use a mirrored video that was on YouTube for them to learn from, but typically a lot of them haven't learned how to pick up dances that way. I have learned how to do that, but video learning is difficult for them, so I realized that I had to do it over and teach them how they normally know how to learn the dances. So the mode of learning, I think, was important for them as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that's important. One of the articles that we talked about, that we referenced about kind of the cognitive tools, did talk about how dancers learn, visually through music, through cues, and kind of being able to get that instant feedback. If they could ask you in the moment, is this what you meant? Is this what you're talking about? Kind of be able to get that instant feedback. And that also, I think, talks about other sports and how we can utilize some of the learning tools that dancers use, marking, videotaping, and some of the I'm looking at my body through a mirror so I can kind of see what I'm doing. And I think taking what we learn from dance and that kind of quick memory and what they can absorb and retain, and how we can bring that into kind of other sports too.
Sure. Just to add something onto that a little bit, there was this other study that I found that was talking about the worsening of post-concussive memory deficits and processing speed after cognitively demanding tasks that have been demonstrated. So they almost had to reenact these tasks that were cognitively demanding, which is basically what you're doing as a dance instructor. And processing speed, I mean, you broke up probably, if I had to guess, 8 to 10 moves in between each break. And if my processing speed is slow, I'm going to freeze, like you mentioned, happened to a couple of dancers. So these post-concussive symptoms, as we said, can be short-term or even long-term. And being able to recognize those affecting an athlete or dancer negatively, is something that's going to be beneficial to us in the long run.
Yeah. And all of them were different levels of dance. Some of them have been dancing for years, like myself, while others are much newer to our group. So to see believe that even like the most experienced were just as like damaged or disrupted as ones that are newer. It just goes back to how important just all brain functioning has to do. It doesn't matter how experienced you are.
Absolutely. When it comes to this test as well, it was a test on rats, actually. So I know it's kind of hard to put that back with humans here.
But, rats? Josh, what did you find?
But anyway, what they were saying was that they induced concussive symptoms in rats, and they found that the rats who had the greatest activity levels post-concussion had the worst visual memory and reaction time, meaning that if I get a concussion and I go back to, say I'm a dancer, say I go back to dance too soon and I have really high activity levels, which would be a dance lesson, my visual memory and reaction time are just going to suck. Both two things that obviously are really vital for a dancer to learn a routine and memorize it and keep it and be able to reenact it later.
And I think, an important part of that, too, is exactly what you just said, is that it's an education, too. Because I know, as any athlete, I can imagine a dancer. If I'm in a room of dancers and I'm struggling to pick it up and my time is delayed and I'm not making the connection from a recent injury, from a potential concussion, I don't know that these are going to impact, I'm going to be impacted in this way. My level of frustration is going to increase, and I'm not going to be able to make that link, and have that self-care or self-awareness. And so I think, I was like, oh, I know a lot about concussions, and I know a little bit about this and that, but the more my education increases, I think we're better to educate our dancers. Don't get frustrated. You had an injury, and this is what's connected with your injury, and you're seeing this because of how your brain has been impacted. It's not, oh, I'm not tough enough, or oh, I'm not bouncing back quick enough. It's your brain, is impacted, and this is what's happening. So I think when we connect it to the physical symptoms, we can relieve, maybe some of that frustration. I couldn't imagine being in a room and having my delay time and then feeling like I look like an idiot. I think I would be frustrated. That's with or without a concussion, but, I think education is such a big, big part of it.
I think it's important to, sorry, Stephanie. I think it's important to mention that there's not one concussion that's exactly the same. Like, everybody's is different. The way they recover is different. So it's pretty much on a case by case. It's impossible to predict how you're going to fix that injury.
Right.
For sure.
And I think this project came at an interesting time because one of our dancers has a concussion. So she's had to be out for a while, and she said that she's been struggling to remember a lot of things in regards to like our dance stuff. So I thought it was interesting just being able to ask her what she was experiencing and having to sit out and not be able to continue learning the dances that everyone's progressing on.
Was she in the video, or is she still out?
No, she's out. The music and just having everyone around is too much for her brain right now.
Yeah. For sure. Jeez. That's wild. Well, you were kind of talking about how you had different levels of dancers. And what I was kind of learning here, too, was that they looked at a bunch of these athletes, and they looked at younger adolescent athletes as well as older teenager athletes, like late teens. And what they found was the younger adolescents showed more pronounced deficits in verbal and visual memory than the older teenagers post-concussion. And although, as Cassandra mentioned, no concussion is going to be the same, but both of these aged athletes both were showing signs of concussions, and the younger ones weren't able to use their verbal and visual memory as well as the older. So I think realizing that we might have different levels of athletes, but along with that, we might have different aged athletes, and development is going to be totally different, even though there's a similar injury.
And I also think connection between dance and how dance is so different concussion-wise is what you mentioned about your, student that was injured. They're being stimulated in multiple different ways, which is, makes it different than other sports. Like you said, they're around maybe a condensed group of people, loud music, the mirrors, so that visual stimulation, plus they're having to do body control, memory, and that learning process. So they're kind of being overloaded with information in all their senses, which can really impact, the brain. Whereas in other sports, maybe it's not quite as, stimulating. So my recovery can look a little bit different because I'm not being overwhelmed by all of my senses. So I thought that was a really good point, specifically to dance and concussions.
Absolutely. Oh.
Does anyone have any kind of, closing remarks or any big takeaways that people give it credit for?
I did a little bit of research on a dance community, and I found that even though that they're aware of what a concussion is, they don't really seek the help for it. So and sometimes they don't even know that they have it. So I also found that gender has a little bit to do with it also. If a male dancer found out that they had a concussion and there was a premiere performance that they were going to do, then they wouldn't do the performance at all. But with females, it was 3%, way less than the males that would stop dancing. So it's interesting because in other research, they found that males were less likely to report a concussion than females. So it may be because the dance community is more female related or more like a female field, but I found that it was interesting that they found contradictory information about that.
That's a good point.
Steph, I think you're right. Yeah, there you go.
Yes. Oh, there. She's back. Our dance expert left us for a minute. We panicked. No, I just think overall, it was really interesting to, not often you get a chance to read articles and then watch, a video and be like, oh, that's accurate, and I'm seeing it, come into play. So I know for me, it recognizes for me to do some more education, because I think the more, I know, the more I can help, the students or athletes that I'm working with. And so for me, that's kind of a big takeaway. That's not, even learning more about the sport specifically can really help when you kind of are helping athletes through these injuries. So it was a learning experience for me, and I'm glad, that I got, kind of those takeaways. So
I'm glad that we focused specifically on dancing because, the research that we did, there wasn't a lot of research out there, so we had to, it wasn't as easy as, say, that we were going to look at football, right? There's a whole bunch of information on concussions in football, but now knowing in all the articles that I noticed, it was it needs more information. There's more information. Every little article I looked at, it was a different study that they were doing, trying to improve on what the last study was, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I feel like overall dance is just an underestimated population. And knowing that them, as well as cheerleaders or any type of, not typical sport that we think of, I think they need just as much of what we have to give, and they experience a lot of the same things that other athletes experience. So it's important to, I think, take away that non-traditional sports that we think of that are on TV are also experiencing a lot of the same things that you see on TV.
Yeah, for sure.
I agree with that point.
Dance as a sport requires verbal, visual memory, short-term, long-term, all the things that are affected negatively by concussions. So really kind of understanding this and being able to apply it to not only other sports, but another sport that I wasn't familiar with, dance, is just another tool in my toolbox. So it's pretty cool.
Going back to the point that that Stephanie made, that, you know, that dance is pretty much underrated. Like, it's not just, a concussion isn't just getting hit on the head. You know, there's like a whiplash sensation. So, you know, there's head inversions and movements, you know, combined with, you know, back impact or hitting a dancer, other little things that could cause that concussion.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
So do we have any closing statements, or?
Dance is awesome!
Something I'll let Stephanie do.
Yeah. I think, I don't know, I'm really glad that we took the opportunity to like branch out and think new, because I mean, concussion is a popular topic, especially among the things that we discuss. So I think trying to look at a new perspective of it is beneficial for us as well as everyone watching this video and the video that we put up on YouTube. So hopefully everyone takes away some of the stuff that we took away. And I think all the dancers that I worked with, they enjoyed the experience, but they also learned a lot from it, because I talked to them about it afterwards and how just experiencing a concussion can affect them so negatively. So it's important for them to be safe and careful when it comes to that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. Very cool. Good job, group.